All right, so we're going to have a look at the process of integrating Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager into a website. And this is specific to the ability to track specific goals such as a form submission in Google Analytics, even with all of the modern changes that Google's been implementing and that we've been facing with regards to preference for secure websites, which costs us the ability to tell the origin of a lot of the clicks in our traffic reports and the sources and refers and so on showing up as no information. So what we want to be able to do is to look at our Google Analytics report and as much as possible determine not just how many visitors we're getting to the website, but how many of them are actually performing specific actions such as submitting a lead inquiry form. This is what we really want to track, and we want to ultimately be able to tell where those successful submissions originated from. So for example, you've launched a website and now you're running a Facebook ad, and what you really want to know is how many people are finding the website on Google and then coming across the lead form and filling it out versus how many people are clicking on that Facebook ad and finding the lead form and filling it out. And you really want to be able to see full statistics. How much are you spending on that Facebook ad per click? How many of those goal conversions translates to actually meaningful financial data for you, so you can figure out what your cost per lead is and make very meaningful business decisions around your advertising choices, your advertising venues, and your advertising budget. Because without that, you're really shooting in the dark. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at a current website which currently has Google Analytics installed directly on the Webflow platform. And we're going to look at the process of replacing that with Google Tag Manager and then building the appropriate tags and triggers to track things like form submissions. So this website's currently running Google Analytics, and this is called the Brucey Group website, built again on the Webflow platform. And there are quite a few different things that we can track on a website, but what we really want to focus on here is the forms. We want to be able to tell when did someone submit a form and ultimately how did they get there. Now I've got a contact us form here on the contact page. That's worth tracking. That's a meaningful action. The much more meaningful action on this website, though, is the lead inquiry form, which appears on these individual service pages. So every one of the service pages has this lead inquiry form. So we want to be able to track those. Doesn't matter which service page I'm on, I can see these forms appear. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just do an inventory of the different forms that we want, and we need to be able to track that. So I tend to set up just a Microsoft Word document to allow me to track really what it is that I want to see, and the meaningful label and submission for tracking once it reaches Google Analytics. Now there are a couple different phases in this process, so let's talk about those first. So setting up Google Tag Manager puts a tag container into your website. That's one part that we need to establish. We need to replace our direct coding of Google Analytics with an analytics implementation within Google Tag Manager, and we want to do that as seamlessly as possible so that we're not losing traffic during this redesign process. And then we need to be able to build additional tags in Google Tag Manager and tie them to the website so that when someone submits a form, Google Tag Manager can detect that. And Google Tag Manager can then submit a particular piece of information for tracking to Google Analytics. So essentially we're going to connect the website to Google Tag Manager, and we're going to connect Google Tag Manager to Google Analytics, and there's a fair bit of wiring that happens in between those points. So let's have a look at the forms here. We've got two forms. We've got a contact form submission, and we've also got the lead form submission. And that's all I'm going to call them, contact form and lead form. Now, ultimately, this is going to be in Google Tag Manager, but it's pushing this data to Google Analytics, which means that in my Google Analytics reports, I'll ultimately see this category, action, and label. You'll see where that comes into play soon. And at the very beginning, at the origin on the website, I actually need to be able to track the form ID. So let's do this very first part, which is replacing analytics with Google Tag Manager. And we're going to set up the account. So first you need to create a Google account and then enter Google Tag Manager, which is tagmanager.google.com. You're going to set up your account there. So I need to go to the accounts page so that I can create a new one. You can see all my different Google Tag Manager accounts here. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it, actually it's Brucey Group. It would be more accurate. Continue. And there we go. Just use the website as the container name. And this is a web container. You have other types of containers you could create as well if you're building, for example, an iOS app, which is not what we're doing here. So I'm creating my account. Now, the container is not published yet, but I can install the container. So next step we want to do is actually go to our website. I'm going to close this down. We're going to go into the designer now. So here we go. And what I want to do is go directly into site settings. So there we go, project settings. And you can see that in this website I currently have configured under integrations, currently have a Google Analytics tracking ID, which I'm going to want to get rid of. And then I'm going to drop the tag manager into custom code. So before I eliminate this, I'm going to go into custom code. I'm going to copy my new tag manager container into custom code. And I think it's very important to identify the manager because there's nothing obvious in this code that tells you what it's been configured for. So I'm going to put Brucey Group. The reason is if I ever clone this website, I really need to be able to look at the head code and figure out if I remembered to change out that tag container or not. That could be quite disastrous if I leave the wrong tag container in the wrong website. I'd be getting some very weird statistics. So I want to protect myself against that. I'm basically doing a little bit of future proofing here. And I'm going to do the same here. Now I want to notice that if you actually look at the Google Tag Manager documentation here, it says paste this code immediately after the opening body tag, which Webflow does not actually support. It pastes the code before the closing body tag. To my knowledge, that's not going to present a problem. So far, I haven't seen anything. So we're just going to proceed. I'm going to save changes. Now, I'm actually not 100% certain in Webflow if I need to click both of these, but it can't hurt either. So now the tag, the container, the Google Tag Manager container, is now set up in my site code, but I haven't published my site yet to public. So the container is not yet active, which is totally fine. However, I'm done here. So the next thing to do now is to go ahead and create the tag for Google Analytics. So I create my new tag, go into my tag configuration. You can see I have Universal Analytics available. I'm going to use that. I want to track page views. I need to create a settings variable, and I don't really care what the name is. However, I need to know my tracking ID now. So I'm going to go actually pull it out of integrations here. I could also pull it straight from Google Analytics, but I already have this. I'm going to go ahead and cut it because I don't want it to stay here after I've created this. I'm going to save. That's fine. I'm only going to have one Google Analytics account tied in here. So that's all I need. And I also need to set the trigger. And the trigger in the case of Universal Analytics is going to be all pages. And this is exactly what I want. I want every page on the website to generate Google Analytics data submit it to Google Analytics using that account ID that I've just specified. So I've now got Google Analytics set up. I'm going to keep the name here, Universal Analytics, as part of my tag container. I've saved that. Everything is ready to go. I can go ahead and publish this container. Remember, I haven't yet published my website, but I can publish the container. I'm not too worried about version names and numbers. So essentially what Google is doing now is taking my configuration for Google Analytics, creating all the information for that tag and that container integration, so that once the website includes that container code, it will then be ready to send data to Google Analytics. So let's go back to our website here. I removed the universal tracking ID. I need to save my changes. That's gone now. So I've got no Google Analytics tracking ID here, but I do have my container code here. Now it's important that I've made both of those changes at the same time, because I don't want to have both pieces of code running at the same time. I could end up with essentially double traffic reports, which would be completely misleading and confusing. But I am now done with preparing the container, the basic container with basic universal analytics, and I've updated my Webflow site, so I'm going to go ahead and publish this live. And now what I'm doing all in one fell swoop is switching out the old universal analytics direct integration with the new tag manager based universal analytics, and I'm done. That should have been seamless. I should have lost no data at all from traffic coming to the website. So now the next step is to actually begin integrating the forms. So what we want to do now is go into the designer. So we're going to need to make some modifications to the forms directly. Now what we'll do first is we'll go into the contact page. Go down to the form in play here, and I'm going to click on a field. Down here I'm going to select the form that I'm wanting to modify and click settings. Now email form is not a very descriptive name. I actually just want to call this the contact form. And when I click out of this field, watch the ID field. It gets automatically renamed. Now this is very important. This ID that is generated and embedded in the published HTML code is what I need for Google Analytics, for Google Tag Manager, to be able to detect that a submit has occurred. So I need to copy this now, and I'm going to track this in my sheet here. So I've got my contact form. This is the form ID, which is going to trigger the event. It's going to be watched, essentially, and it's going to ultimately create this data, which Google Tag Manager delivers to Google Analytics. So my contact form is lined up. Now we need to go do the same thing for the lead form. Now the lead form, I can go to any one of my services pages. Scroll down, and you can see that this happens to be an element. I'm going to click any item. Again, go to form. Be careful not to select form block by accident, because it does not have the ID. Make sure you click the form itself. And this one I actually want to call lead form, just so I can be very distinct, very consistent with my naming conventions on what's coming through. And you can see it's automatically given a new ID to this form as well. Now in this particular site, that's all I need to track. I don't have a mailing list. I don't have any mailing list subscription forms that I want to track. I'm pretty well set in terms of forms, and particularly for this demonstration, we're in good shape. Now I need to go ahead and publish the website again, now that I've got my forms labeled and ID'd. So let's publish that. And we're actually done with our work on the website now. Now everything we want to do can be done in Google Tag Manager. So now we're linking the form to Google Tag Manager. I'm going to go back to my workspace. Now because I'm doing a form-based integration, one of the first things I need to do in Google Tag Manager is make the right variables available to me. So I need to go into the Variables tab. I need to do some configuration. And you can see there are a lot of different choices here. I need to scroll down until I see forms, and I'm going to go ahead and enable all of the form-related variables. The only one I really care about is form ID, but we'll go ahead and put them all in to be consistent. It takes a moment for this to load everything in. Once I'm done, I'm all set, and I can go to now setting up the triggers. So the triggers is a little piece of code which detects the actual form submit. So I create my first trigger, and I'm going to create this trigger as a form submission trigger. So I'm going to detect when a form has been submitted. But because I want to be able to separate my tracking of the Contact Us form and my lead submission forms, I need to be specific. It's not any form that gets submitted, it's specific forms. And I wanted to detect that based on the ID equaling a specific value. The first one we'll go ahead and do is the contact form. So this is the first ID I need, is my contact form ID. And double check your work. Form ID equals contact form. Yes, I'm setting up the contact form. I can now save this change. Now the trigger name, I actually want to keep track of what I'm doing, so I'm very specific here. So this is a form submission, and this is contact form. This will help me tell in Google Tag Manager what code is for what, which could be very important for later. All right, I've created the first trigger. Let's create the second trigger. Same exact process. Form submission, some forms, where the form ID is exactly equal to my second ID, which is the lead form. I can save this change. Now I want form submission lead, just so I can identify what I'm working with. And now I've got my two triggers created. Now the next step is to tie the triggers to the tags. Essentially what this means is that once a trigger fires, it will generate a tag, which is a piece of data that is then submitted to Google Analytics for tracking. And this is where Google Analytics gets involved. So I've already got my tag for Universal Analytics, which is the first connection to Google Analytics. Let's create another one. So the first tag I'm going to create here is again going to be selecting Universal Analytics. This time, instead of page view, this is going to be an event that's occurring. And this is where these fields come into play. Category, action, and label. These are the pieces of data that are going to be passed through to Google Analytics. So category very consistently is going to be forms. Action's always going to be submit, simply for consistency, and we're going to do the contact form first. I do need to specify exactly which Google account I'm sending this to, which analytics account. And that's really all I need to set at this point. So I've got an event, and this is the data. So this is the tag that's going to be generated. Now you can include variables and so on. At this point, we're not too worried about that. But you can get quite fancy and advanced. Now, because I'm doing the contact form, I need to connect that to the trigger for the contact form submission. Make sure you wire them up correctly or your data is going to be pretty messed up. And at this point, I've got my tag and my trigger created. I can save this. And I'm going to call this one form submission. Actually, what I'm going to call this one is the same as I have here, contact form, just for simplicity. This is my contact form tag. Save that. And let's create our second one. Tag configuration, Universal Analytics, event, category, forms, action, submit, label. It's going to be lead form. There we go. Forms, submit, lead form. Need to select my Google Analytics account again, and we're set. The trigger needs to be lead form. We're all set. Double check your work and save. And again, I'm just going to paste in lead form. This helps me tell what's what in Google Tag Manager. Now, the only data that's actually going to come through to analytics are those 3 fields that I just showed you in the tag definition. We are now done with Google Tag Manager, but we're not done yet with the process. We now need to go to Google Analytics and integrate. So first things, let's go ahead and find our Google Analytics account, correct for this business. And what I can do is I can go directly in. There are a couple different things I can connect. For example, I may want to check and make certain that I have my keywords from the Search Console integrated. So I can link Search Console here. And I'm not certain if this one has been I need to scroll back up. Nothing. Okay, so I'm going to add in my Search Console account. So I need to find first the correct one. And I believe I've been specifying these. Let's see if we can find this. Okay, so I've only got bruceygroup.co.nz for this company. Let me double check that. Okay, that is the default host name that I'm using. That's great. I wanted to make sure it wasn't bruceygroup.nz, which a lot of the websites are. So this is the correct account, which should be collecting all of the search traffic data. Be careful not to click down here. You actually want to save, since I've already got that account properly created. So I'm creating the association now. That part's done. Back to analytics, and I can leave this if I want. And now we want to go and actually set up. I could be doing AdWords linking as well, which is quite often the case. This company is not yet running AdWords, so I can leave that alone. Now at this point I want to go into my goal setting, and one way to get there easily, simply go into conversions, part of your Google Analytics report, go to goals, click overview, and you'll see that nothing has been set up. And this is where we set it up. So first thing I'm going to do is come in here, and I've got again 2 goals that I really want to track. So I create my first new goal. I'm going to call this one simply contact form. It's going to be an event. Click continue. And now I need to enter in those exact same 3 pieces of data, the exact category, the exact action, and the exact label, in order to link up what Google Analytics is tracking and showing in its reports with what Google Tag Manager is shipping to it. So we already know it's going to be forms as a category with an S. It's going to be submit. And the label is going to be contact form, but let's verify that. Forms, submit, contact form. We are all set. And we are now complete in configuring this goal for Google Analytics to track. We've got contact form tracking. Now we're going to do the second goal, which is going to be the lead form. And for simplicity, I'm just going to name it that. Don't forget, event, continue, forms, submit. We are all set. You really need to be precise with these things, or you're not going to get any data at all. We are now 100% wired up. Now, it's quite a lengthy process, quite a few steps, and there are an enormous range of capabilities and options you can get into if you want to get fancier or dealing with a more complex scenario. But this should allow you to get basic analytics data working on your website and basic goal tracking around form submission, which should give you an enormous amount of benefit in being able to tell what's working for your clients.